Hello everyone, and welcome to our board candidate video program. This segment focusing on laws school board candidates should know. And joining me for the discussion is Susan Goldammer, staff attorney for the Missouri School Boards Association, Mike Grote, governmental relations consultant for MSBA, and Mike Reed, associate executive director for advocacy for MSBA. And we thank all of you for joining us.
Thank you.
And Susan, let's start with you if we could. Let's talk about the issue of personal financial disclosure. What do our candidates need to know about that?
Well, a personal financial disclosure is actually a statement that is filed with the Missouri Ethics Commission, and it typically deals with property owned by the candidate or financial interests or business that the candidate or businesses that they own do with the district, or businesses with which they're associated do with the school district. They're also known as financial interest statements or personal financial interest statements, but all candidates, the general rule is, have to file these by a particular deadline with the Missouri Ethics Commission. And the end goal is to allow for the public to know what kinds of financial interests a candidate has to determine if there might be a conflict of interest or if that's an appropriate person to serve in that position.
Mm-hmm. And how do they know when they have to file such a disclosure?
Well, the school district is required to notify the candidate in writing whether they are required to file and what form they are required to file and when that filing date is, when the deadline is for that candidate to file.
Mm-hmm. And is there so there's a particular form that a candidate has to use, is that right?
Yes, there's actually two versions of the form depending on the district's policy. Okay, so there's a long form, and indeed it is long. It requires the candidate to disclose all kinds of financial interests that they have, all the property that they own, et cetera. Then there's a shorter form, and quite honestly, most candidates are only going to be required to fill out the shorter form, but it does depend on the school district's policy and whether they have adopted a policy and sent it into the Missouri Ethics Commission. Those districts that do, their candidates only need to consider filing the short form.
Mm-hmm. What are some examples of some information that might have to be disclosed on such a form?
Well, in the short form, it would primarily be transactions that the board member, his or her spouse or dependent children, or their parents have done with the district, or businesses with which all of these relatives are associated in any sort of business that they do with the district. On the longer form, it will be a lot more extensive, you know, property that you own, stock that you own, companies where you might be on the board of directors, those kinds of things.
Mm-hmm. Susan, are there any exceptions to candidates filing these personal financial disclosure forms?
Well, with every rule, there is an exception. School districts that have an operating budget of $1 million or less, their candidates are not required to file with the Missouri Ethics Commission. In addition, if the district has adopted its own policy, and there's a special law for this, and has adopted their own conflict of interest policy, and the candidate doesn't have anything to disclose, and the policy doesn't otherwise require them to fill out a financial interest statement, then the candidate won't have to file. But because there's so many ifs involved, it's really important for the candidate to talk to the school district in which the candidate is applying and determine whether or not they're required to file.
Are there some deadlines associated with these disclosure forms that our candidates need to be aware of?
Yes, there's two deadlines, both of which are very important. The first date is the date that you need to file if you want to avoid fines. And those fines can be significant. It can go up to even $6,000 if you're late in filing. So it's really important to make sure if you're going to file that you file by that particular date. The second date is actually a true deadline. If you don't file and you're required to file, you don't file by that date, you can be removed from the ballot. Candidates also need to know that the forms are on the Missouri Ethics Commission website, that they can file these forms electronically, but they need to also give a copy to the local school district. And if a candidate is in doubt as to whether they need to file or not, always err on the side of filing. You don't want to be removed from the ballot.
Mike Grote, let's talk about setting up candidate committees. What do our candidates need to know about that?
Sure. When a candidate is forming a committee, when they're looking at running for office, there's a couple of things they have to do. There's a packet that they can get from the Ethics Commission which walks them through the formation and how that formation of that committee works. In some scenarios, much as Susan was saying, there's kind of this if-then, here's what you have to do type scenario, and there's both a state filing as well as a local filing that some of our candidates may have to do with the local election authority as well as the Ethics Commission. But essentially the first question they need to ask themselves of, am I going to be raising money, and if I'm going to be spending money? And if they're going to be doing that, then they need to be looking at the Ethics Commission, filing a committee, having a name for that committee. They will have to have established a connected bank account that exclusively for the purpose of that committee, and they've got to come up with a treasurer. And the treasurer's responsibility is to file the various reports, both quarterly and then as you get close to the election, the various election-related reports on income and expenditures made by the committee. So there's definitely a process they have to go through to get that information filed with the Ethics Commission. And in some situations, they would also have to file that same form, that same document with their local election authority as well.
So how do they know if they actually have to form a committee
Sure.
or not?
I always err on the side, as Susan said, you want to make sure you err on the side of being safe. But the rules essentially say that anytime you raise more than $325, or if their expenditures and their contributions combined exceed $1,000, in either one of those scenarios, they would then have to report.
So a lot of our school board candidates are probably not raising a lot of money in their campaigns, so many of them might not have to do this.
Many of them may not have to do this. Again, though, it's always good to err on the side of safety, and if you think there's a possibility that you will exceed that threshold at some point in time, it's probably good to go ahead and form a committee and make sure that you're abiding by the rules.
And are there some deadlines related to this that our candidates need to be aware of?
Sure. Just as with anything else, there are deadlines. Primarily, you've got to get your committee set up and organized 30 days prior to the election. If you look at the monitor right now, it'll tell you what those deadlines are and those date deadlines for the current election.
Mm-hmm. All right. Mike Reed, are there limits on how much money school board candidates can receive?
No, there are no limits in the state of Missouri. So you can receive as much money as you want to. So if Aunt Mary wants to give you $500 or $1,000 or whatever, that's just perfectly fine. If it does happen, of course, then you have to then form that committee. But there are no limits. This is a reporting state. So it is more on not who gave it to you, but it is, if they did give it to you, then you must report so the transparency is out there so everybody can see.
Mm-hmm. Now, Mike, on a lot of campaign materials for all kinds of offices, we often see the phrase paid for by. They're labeled. Is that important for school board candidates too?
That's probably one of the most important thing, if not the most important thing that you should remember. Probably, and I know that the majority of complaints during election time come from people who file that say material is not properly identified. So printed material, and that means ads in the newspaper, on television, flyers, stickers, all kinds of printed material, must contain a paid for by statement, which is who paid for it. So if in fact, if it's paid for just by the candidate, all it has to say is paid for by the candidate and by the candidate's name. So paid for by John Smith, if it comes out of his or her own funds. If it comes from the committee, it must say paid for by the committee to elect John Smith, Mary Jones Treasurer. All of those must be on there, the name of the committee and the treasurer, as it has been filed with the Ethics Commission and the local election authority. If a corporation wants to spend money, which they perfectly can, and take out an ad, fine. Paid for by the name of the corporation, as it is named, its address, and its chairman. A group of friends want to take out an ad in the paper. If it's 5 or less, you have to put their names, paid for by, list the names and their addresses. If there's more than 5, you list the person who is responsible and says, for a list of names, contact Joe Jones on that. All of this, it has to be out there to let people know who is responsible for paying for these pieces of advertisement.
So does the same apply to, say, something like a website?
Well, it's a real interesting question, we believe that the website should be identified, whether it's required by statute or required by federal law. It's a real good question. You should put at the bottom, though, paid for by on the website. If nothing else, it's always good to get your name out there in front of people one more time.
And Mike, of course, you used to work for the Ethics Commission, and you dealt with some of these complaints when campaigns were going on for school board and other races. And are there other common mistakes that candidates make?
The most common mistakes, of course, are the paid for by. The other mistake that happens often in elections, especially for boards, etc., are sitting board members will want to use the resources of the district or the political subdivision. You cannot do that. You cannot use political subdivision money to support or oppose a ballot measure or a candidate. So if somebody is sitting as a school board member and says, I have 100 flyers I need to get printed, and I just take them down to the school and run them off on the copy machine, you can't do that. So let's do not use any school resources to support or oppose a ballot measure or a candidate. The biggest thing to remember is this is a reporting state. Who gave you the money and where did it go?
Mm-hmm. So there's a lot to keep track of, Susan, but there are resources available for our candidates, both from MSBA and the Ethics Commission.
Yes, yes, and I do encourage any candidate to go to the Missouri Ethics Commission website. They have a lot of information, a lot of guidances. They've even got some recorded webinars that you can learn more about all of these things. They also have a very helpful help desk. You can email or call them. In addition, if your district's a member of the Missouri School Boards Association, feel free to give us a call and we would be glad to assist. And every candidate should feel free to ask the superintendent, the board president, the board secretary, any member of the school board questions about these issues and get some answers.
All right, Susan Goldammer, Mike Grote, Mike Reed, thanks a lot for being with us on our program on laws that school board candidates need to know.